strategy,
design,
marketing,
UX,
digital.
development.
This is Agencies That Build. This show is dedicated to leaders and teams that design and deploy in the digital world. My name is Jessie, and I'm a marketer and an agency owner.
And I'm Varun. I'm not a marketer, but a coder and an agency partner.
This show is sponsored by Together We Ship.
On a mission to help agencies grow.
All right, rock on. We're here. Hi, Varun. How's it going, my friend?
Hi, Jessie. How are you?
I'm good. I'm happy that it's finally sunny out. I
know, right?
Yeah, I feel like we always talk about the weather right at the beginning of this. That's kind of like our shtick. What's the weather like? It's good,
It's a killer conversation to break the ice. Right?
There you go. And there's no ice, which is even better. All right. So I have the pleasure of introducing today's guest, who I'm going to read this pretty epic introduction. So is an executive with extensive experience in building and leading high-performing teams in professional services, customer success, and technology delivery. He's an entrepreneur. He's worked with a full range of companies from startups to large enterprises, including NBC Sports, Staples, and Pfizer. I also have worked with Bill myself, which is why we're chatting with him, formerly of Vistaprint, many double digits ago. I won't say the year, but you could probably look it up on LinkedIn. Principal at Advanced Velocity, Bill Whitebone. Welcome to the show, my friend. We're happy to have you.
Thanks for having me. Definitely good to see you too.
Yeah. So we like to start out with a myth busting question. So I'm just going to ask it up front. What myth would you like to smash? What kind of bogus strategy, misconception? What do you want to clear up going on in your world? What's cooking over there?
So many. If I think about something that I've found over the years with clients and really how you solution for clients, the way that I guess to sum it up, solutions are easy. They're not easy, right? And I'm not sure everybody thinks they're easy, but the way that I look at it is that we work with clients. We need to solve issues, challenges for clients. And the way that you identify those is actually by asking the question of what's difficult. What do you need help with? What's keeping your business from functioning optimally? And a lot of times those are very specific things, right? And certainly you could take an approach of addressing those specific things. And I think there are companies and consultants out there who do specifically that. But generally, there's a broader challenge, right? And I think that's an important way to enter into an engagement, a new relationship with a client, is really understanding the broader challenge. I often work with companies that are having problems with customer success or with professional services. And professional services is probably the one where I see this the most, but they'll say, we are managing our business with too many tools. We have a bunch of spreadsheets. What we need to do is just integrate all these things. And there must be a way that we can take what we're already using and fix that. And yeah, there probably is, but stepping back and saying, what are the challenges and what's the optimal solution to this is a much better way, right? So, and I see that both in technology builds, I see it in the pure consulting work that I do. But I think it's important for folks to think about what's the real issue and how can I really help in the longer term versus just addressing current issues.
Do you find that people come to you with, outside of the solution, do they come to you with like, here's the problem we're trying to solve, or here's the solution I want, can you build it, or do you get both?
I get both. More often when I have clients approach me, they are having a specific problem, right? So often they'll see that I specialize in customer success and professional services, and they're having a particular problem in those areas, right? So, and one that I often see and prompts outreach is that they have resources that have left, right? So we had the wrong person in the role, and that's what's wrong, right? Well, then I walk in and they didn't leave because they were the wrong person. They left because the structure of the organization may not have been the best, right? So there's many instances like that. But then there are clients too that say, hey, I've done a little bit of research and could you just implement this for me? And sometimes there's a better solution than that too. Sometimes that's right, but certainly there's better solutions potentially in many of those cases.
I think that's a common situation in a lot of agencies where people come because they're looking to solve the problem that they think they figured out what the solution is. And they're like, oh yeah, this is what I need. Can you just build it? And You dig
Right.
in and you're like, oh,
Exactly. Yeah. And I've seen that from a technology build perspective, and I've seen it from just an organizational perspective. The challenges are definitely more complicated. I mean, not necessarily much larger, but more complicated than what you might see on the surface.
Sometimes you don't know, or the clients don't know, if they really need a solution from you. They, as you mentioned, like they already know what the solution is, and they just come ask for help. But then until you talk to them, they don't realize that the solution that they were thinking in their head is not the solution in fact, right?
Right.
Sometimes you need to guide them through. So that is what we see most of the time in the agency world, where you need to wear the consultant hat and you need to guide the direction of the conversation in a way where you go to the root of the problem before jumping on the outcome. You know,
Yeah.
why they are here in the first place, where did you come from, where, like, it's not always a resource problem. Yes, resource problem happened because of certain things, and then that is causing certain problem which requires a certain solution. They quickly jump to the solution, I want this. But
Right.
then how can you come to that solution is where I think agency owners can really help. So in your case, I know, you have 35, 40 people in the company.
Yep.
How have you navigated such discussions with the clients? Is it you who always does that? Do you have team who does that? And how do you train them? How do you, if you have a team who does that, then how do you train them? If it's you, then what's the thought? What's the tactic that you use to make sure that they don't feel that you are um, putting words in their mouth, and you're working as a partner and as a collaborator versus somebody who just would take orders from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And usually it's a team approach. So when it comes to a technical solution, it's usually me, business analyst, and also an architect. And if I think about how we really start to dig deeper and understand without someone feeling like we're not listening to them, is really try to understand their business, right? That's a really important part of being a consultant. And I think a lot of people who move through their career and maybe come into consulting later don't realize how important it is to really become somewhat of an expert on their business, right? So you're not coming in as an outside advisor saying, well, I don't really know your business, but in general, this solution works, right? So wanting to understand the business, wanting to understand their challenge, and everything's different, right? So you could walk into an engagement with one company that, they say, I'm having problems with content and managing content, and you could go into another company that identifies the same problem, but the root issue could be completely different, right? So one may not have a CMS solution. One may have a CMS solution that actually has terrible content in it. The whole content methodology is wrong. So it's really being able to identify with their business, identify with their needs, and walk through how they use the application, right? So how do you use it? How do customers use it? And just really understand the use cases and the business space. And it takes a little more time, but I think the value is huge.
And you mentioned that when you go into the conversation, you position yourself as an expert. Now, when you are an expert, you cannot, as an agency owner, you cannot be an expert on everything. Or maybe you are. Some agency owners position themselves like that we are an expert to solve technical problems without any without being technology or industry specific. They can be just pretty much solve any problem in any industry. How
Yeah.
do you approach it? What's your thought around that? Like, do you want to focus only in one industry, or you think you have the knack of solving problems in pretty much any industry?
So it's funny. It's funny you asked that, because it's something I've been thinking about recently too. And so I'm 3 years into this with my own company, and you think about the evolution of a company or an agency, and when you first start out, you want to leave as many opportunities out there as there possibly can be, right? So I have a very diverse background. I have specialties in customer success, professional services. I've done all kinds of technical builds for enterprise level companies, for small companies, right? So there's a lot of things that I can do. And not personally necessarily, but I have resources and I have a team that can do these things. But as you evolve as a company, you need to focus more, right? And that's something that I think a lot of companies fall into a trap. And where you see it the most, it's funny. You can go out there and you can sell whatever solution, but try and market yourself that way. You can't, right? So once you get to a point where you really need to market your agency and your company, if you're too diverse, people just look at it and they say, they're not specialties. They're not specialists in anything. If I look at their website, if I look at the use cases they have out there, they're not something that actually, nothing appeals to me entirely. And so that's been a really interesting evolution for me. Of course, I've worked for lots of companies that were very specialized, but as a new business owner and starting out, I wanted to have the opportunity to take in all kinds of business, right? I wanted to leave the door open, and we've very successfully delivered everything that we've taken on. But now I realize, as I want to really grow the business more quickly, I need to focus, and I need to put a message out there that's very clear about what we specialize in.
Well, so that brings me to the other point, because the point of specialization versus generalization that we ask many agencies as well. And you are at a point with 35, 40 people is when this question is most important, because now you can stay specialized at this scale, at this level, but you cannot, I mean, maybe some are, but it's hard for somebody to specialize when you grow beyond this. Like we are at 400 people now. We can never be specialized, right? So we don't call ourselves specialized. We are generalists, and we have a different model. But as you plan to grow your business, like, I don't know what your goals are. If you want to go to 100 people, would you stay specialized? Or would you go against what you're saying now, that no, we have to diversify. We want to keep our doors open, and we need to. So what's your strategy, and how do you think about it?
Yeah, and I think there's two things. Companies go through phases, right? So there's different phases of growth where you may need a more of a focus, you may need less of a focus, and then there's also what is your space, right? Like, so your company offering as many technology solutions or as much technology expertise as possible makes a world of sense, right? Whereas if I think about my company, I have two key areas that I work in, right? So I do pure consulting, and I also do builds, technology builds, right? And very capable of doing both. But do I have to look at messaging that's clear, that makes one a priority, more of a priority, right? And if I think about my business and the thing that is most interesting to me, we're always going to have a technology build piece, and a lot of the technology build we do now supports the work that we're doing from a pure consulting perspective. But if I think about where the key opportunity is to differentiate and to really use my skills and some of the other folks' skills on the team, it really is from that consulting perspective. And it could be consulting on customer success, professional services. It could be just technology and engineering, right? So, but I think my thinking now is that as we evolve, for now, we look to really focus more on that consulting piece with supporting technology implementation capabilities.
You guys, it's an interesting conversation. I mean, coming from the world of marketing, living in the world of marketing, it's the number one thing that people fail at is they don't, I can market anything to anybody, but if I don't know who I'm talking to, what's the point?
Yeah.
So it goes back to, target audience, ideal customer, differentiation, all the things that you guys are talking about there. But it's, there are things that you don't do, that you will never do. There's things that, Varun, that your larger organization will never do. You've been clear about where the line is, and Bill, you guys have picked a really interesting niche with customer success and builds around that specifically. I think you might be there's a clear niche there, and people have approached me for various topics. I don't do anything in a particular industry. I don't have experience there. There's certain, it's an interesting, that's I think one of the biggest mistakes people make when hopping into running an agency and saying, yeah, we can support whomever, whenever. It's like, okay,
Yes.
but how well can you do that?
Right.
And then you like doing it? Is that, and so the yes answer to that is like, okay, am I doing this because I want to see if I like it? Or am I doing this because it's a money grab? Or it's an interesting, I think it's a really big challenge that we actually haven't talked a lot about on the podcast yet. That people approach, from a growth perspective with you guys in terms of where you're headed and, staffing and all of that. Talk to us a little bit about how you've been able to, grow to those 40 people and staying close to your goals. And, we've talked a little bit in our prep conversation around your usage of outsourcing. I'll just say it, and the kind of the benefits that you've had there. Would love to hear some of your thoughts and your successes with some of that. And then I'm going to ask you a question about challenges, just to prep you.
Okay, perfect.
So,
yeah, I mean, and that question is a great question based on my experience, right? So my experience has been, earlier career was my own team, right? So I started as a developer, moved into project management, moved into managing larger project management teams.
well, even at Vistaprint, we were global. By the time you were there, and it was like the last year we overlapped. We were a global company. We worked globally.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
And so, I started to get the experience, and Vistaprint was a good step for, hey, part of my team can actually be in Switzerland, part of it can be in India, part of it can be, and it all worked well, right? So it could be anywhere. And from Vistaprint, I went to Acquia, and Acquia was a really interesting experience for me because we only used third party for implementation. So I had engagement managers and I had architects that were my team, but the people that were actually delivering the solutions were all third party. So I learned a lot in that period of time, and I had some excellent wins and I had some terrible failures, right? So probably the most challenging project I've ever done, and I've done it multiple times, is the Olympics for NBC Sports. So that was a really interesting one.
Pretty big opportunity there.
It has a very distinct deadline. So that one, the first one especially, I was managing a third party based out of the Midwest, who really they were more of a lifestyle company. So I was working in the open source space. So Acquia is the Drupal company, right? So you find a lot of companies that are lifestyle companies within the open source space. It's pretty interesting. So we were relying on this company to hit deadlines and get this implementation in place for us on 90 days before the Olympics started. It had to. There's no flexibility. It had to happen. And we were at DrupalCon, so the big Drupal conference for the year, and they were all there. And I was like, guys, we're kind of running behind. How are you guys getting the work done right now? And they're like, well, we are at DrupalCon, so at DrupalCon we don't work. We're taking a break. And I was like, but we're behind, and I had no idea that you didn't actually work during this time period. How are we going to meet our dates? Well, we'll figure that out after. So that's right. That was one of the worst third-party experiences I had. And what choices did I have? Only choice I had was to find another agency, right? So here I am in the midst of this super high pressure project, and I got to find a whole new team to do it. So there was a lot of learning that happened around selecting the right team after that. So, I learned how to really understand what teams' interests are, what their dedication to projects are, how they run their business. So that was really helpful for me. So I managed implementation managers managed many projects with third parties, and we got to know the best third parties. But I still got to a point where I was like, I still need a core team, right? I don't have a core team at all. And so I decided to go to one of our partners. So one of Acquia's partners, I went to Blink Reaction, which at the time was a 35-person company that used resources that were based out of Ukraine. And it went really well. I mean, that was having a team that was offshore. That was my team. And then being able to leverage third-party expertise when I needed it was huge. So if I look at my current team structure, it's a mix, right? So it's a mix of my core team and outsourcing. So it really trying to get the best resources I can and apply them when necessary, right? I don't want to run an organization that has a lot of overhead, because I also think that differentiating from a price perspective is important, right? So I don't want to be just another agency who does implementation and does it for the same price as anybody else. I want to deliver very high quality at a differentiated price.
So I have two questions. I think that's very interesting conversation, because one, you mentioned you learned a lot by working, with offshore companies and hiring and finding the best practices for how to pick the right offshore company or third-party provider. What are those best practices? What do you look for? How do you identify, yes, this seems like a good fit for me and for any other agency? Because right now, many agencies that we are talking to, they are also in the process of thinking about offshore, nearshore, and just third-party vendors just to scale and grow. And finding the right team is hard. It's not easy. Like, there are millions of companies out there sending out emails every single day.
Yeah.
How do you know if this is the right fit for you? What do you look for?
Yeah, a lot of it is the people, right? And understanding the people and their goals. And if I think of my primary partner right now, it's an Indian company. I've worked with them for 10 years. I actually started working with them when I was at Acquia. And the things that differentiate them are, one, wanting to understand more, right? So it's not a situation where I give them a list of requirements necessarily, and they come back with, yeah, we've nailed your list of requirements. This is how much it costs. They actually ask questions, right? So, and they make suggestions. And I think that's an important piece, right? Seeing a company that engages beyond just taking orders.
So that's true. But I'm talking about pre-screening, right? When you don't know them, how they work, because everybody will give you all these promises that, yes, we do that, we will ask questions, we will do everything. But how do you know how do you know if they are, like, unless you give them a try, right? And you cannot try with 10 other companies. And I mean, maybe there are companies who do multiple tries, but are there any, quick—
What do you look
signs?
for in a good partner before you even get to that level of conversation? I think is where the question is.
Yeah. And it's hard. I mean, it's really hard. It's at that early stage. The things that are most interesting to me is certainly looking at the customers they've worked with, right? And also if you can actually get some references. Let's be honest here. References are the best possible implementations that ever been done, right? So are they completely representative of what the company can do? Not necessarily. But if they can give you 2 or 3 folks who actually are willing to speak positively about them, it says something. And then it's really talking to the leadership of the company and understanding where are you headed? Like what's your focus? Where are you headed? How do you see yourself as a partner? And that's really indicative when someone explains what a partnership is to them and how a partnership looks. That's where I start to see or get some insight, right? And depending on the size of the company, it's what level of engagement is there across the company, right? Am I talking to a business development person purely, or does the CEO want to talk to me? Does some of the executive team want to talk to me? So, and of course that speaks to sometimes just the size of the company, but I also, if I'm going to partner, I want to know that I'm talking to the people who run the business, and that's a really important piece for me.
Good. That's good advice. In terms of engagement models, which model have you seen worked best for you? Like fixed cost, staff org, or project basis? Like, how do you? You said you have been working with one company for 10 years, so I'm assuming they have set aside a core team exclusively working for you because you may be giving them multiple work, or maybe it's on demand, because from offshore companies' perspective, they would want to partner with companies who can keep giving them regular work, right? So they can keep their team busy. So over time, I can understand that becomes a core team. But when someone is starting out, what do you think would be a right way for them to start the engagement? And then, what to look for? So
I can speak to it from the perspective of how do I sleep at night when I just started my business, right? And certainly fixed price coming from the third party is what the only way you can sleep at night is if that's how you start out, right? So I need a fixed price, and I need a company that I can trust to some degree. And a key part of me starting my company was around the fact that I had a partner that I could trust, right? So if I had entered into this with no partners that were proven, it would have been a lot harder. But add to it the fact that they had consistently delivered well on fixed costs. So I knew I could give a price to my client, and it would get delivered at that price, unless something significantly changed. That was the only way that I could do it in the beginning and have any comfort. I mean, otherwise I couldn't have focused anywhere else. I would have spent all my time watching the burn and consistently watching that particular first engagement. But the only way I could focus on the rest of the business was to be able to trust that. And certainly if you have a good team and you have confidence in what you're delivering, fixed price is the way to go, right? So it's certainly riskier, but if you know what you're doing and you know how your team works, there's more margin to be had there potentially, right? So higher risk, higher reward. So it really depends on the particular engagement. If there's very clear requirements up front, you can really get clarity from the client and what their expectations are, or set their expectations reasonably, then yeah, fixed is the way to go. If you're going to learn along the way, then time materials is certainly a better way to go. And generally in a project where I might have a client who says, I need to do this really fast and I need you to get started quickly, then a time materials, nobody will go without any reference point on price, right? You hear a lot of talk about agile, and I talk to these people who say, oh, we just went in with an agile approach and we just told them what it was going to cost on a sprint by sprint basis. I've yet to actually find that customer. So maybe they're out there, but I think that's difficult. But yeah, I think T&M, if there's uncertainty, and then staff aug, I find longer term engagements. I have some maintenance engagements where staff aug makes sense. Or specialty. This is a very highly specialized, more brief engagements. Staff aug can also make sense.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, a lot really depends on the type of project or the client. If they are building a product, which is not going to be built over a month, right? If it's a month or 2 months project, maybe it's a fixed cost is the best way to go from both perspective, like from client and from the deliveries perspective. They're not going to give you a resource for 2 months. I mean, we know it's, $25-30 an hour over there. And then you end up spending 2 resources, 10 grand. I mean, you can sell the project for 50 grand, and for them, it's just 10 grand of money. That may not work. But if it is a longer, long-term product development, then yes, I think staff aug does make sense.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Justin.
When you're exploring those options, are there key roles within, an offshore team that you would identify, when working with a partner and choosing a partner, going back to it occurred to me as you guys were talking and listening to the different types of models, are there key roles within an offshoring partner that you're looking for that are must-haves in that type of relationship?
Yeah, and part of it for me is skills, right? So I have multiple partners because the different partners have different skills that they bring to the table. So if I look at the partner I was speaking about earlier, they're Drupal specialists, right? So they've done Drupal for many, many years, and they also do some other technologies, but they don't do everything, right? They've decided to focus in certain areas. So for me, it's looking at what particular specialty do I need? That's a key part of it. And then also the roles are important, right? And I think that having technology leadership roles within a company is important. I have my own architecture resources, but you still need a technical architect or at least a team lead who can pull everything together with the offshore team. Because I'd say more of what I've done is kind of or what I do is an onshore offshore kind of approach, right? So it's not solely offshore. I have technical expertise and I have project management expertise in the US, but I may still leverage that expertise from my partner to a different degree, right? So I found that can be optimal, is really to have a role here, a role there, and have the communication channels happening between them.
Yeah. Yeah, we have seen that working as well. But the other thing that not many people talk about is, and you also mentioned that, earlier in one of the comments that at I think Vistaprint, you had core team and then they have an offshore team. Why is it like so? Just want to ask, right? When you say core team, that's your full-time team that is working exclusively for you.
Yeah.
And when you talk about outsourcing or third-party team, they are like contractors, right? Even though those contractors work exclusively for you and your projects, they are still considered as contractor. Why are they not considered as core team, other than the fact that they are not given the benefits other than salary? But if they are working with your team, they are your team, they are your core team. What's the difference?
So I think in some engagements, I don't think I know in some engagements, they are part of the core team, right? But if you look at it from the perspective of working project to project, sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not, right? But in some instances, they are pretty much always there, right? I have situations where for a year or more, the same resources are there. But I think it's a mindset, right? It's an interesting question because there's us and them, and that shouldn't necessarily be the view. And the way it feels when you have a good partner is they are part of the core team, right? Yeah. But as you talk about it, that may not be the way that you position it. But if you have an optimal partner, it should feel like that.
Yeah, that's what we have tried to do recently. You know, some of the customers that we work with, I mean, they tell us the same thing, right? This is our core team and you are our extended partners. And, you know, even though they've been working together for years, now what we started doing, well, you know, was if our client, well, when we approached them and told them, you know, this team is your team, right? Consider them as your team and enjoy working with them as well as you do with your internal team. Right. Celebrate and do everything that you do together. I mean, and anyways, everybody is remote. It's just a time difference. Otherwise, whatever you are doing here can be done over there, and then they can, you know, just collaborate and have, you know, festivities going on.
Do you think it's going to change mindset-wise as people are more remote? I mean, it's just it's an interesting, as everybody's, you know, we're not in an office, and it's become much more like, honestly, socially acceptable to work from home, work remotely, work virtually, whatever word you want to describe what all three of us, you know, do in some cases. Do you anticipate seeing that mindset change, you know, in terms of how you describe this?
I mean, I've seen an evolution myself, right? So if I look at when I first started working with Ukrainian resources many years ago versus what today looks like, I think there's a lot more acceptance of resources from other countries, right? And it used to be, communication's really hard and the time zones are different. And I don't know, that their culture's different, but I think that people are realizing that it works much better than they thought it would, right? So, and I think the current circumstances have contributed to that, like the fact that we have been forced to communicate via Zoom or Meet, and it's gone fine, has really opened up, or it's changed the guideline that people had, right? I think the guideline has moved further out, which is really helpful. And I know the conversations I have now about offshore teams versus what I had 10 years ago they're very different in general, right? So you still have some legacy out there of, resources from this particular country do this, they do this all the time. And this is the challenge I face in every project. And that's not my experience. And it's interesting to speak to people like that. And often when you ask them, can you give a particular, or did you have a particular experience where you saw that? A lot of them can't tell you where they actually experienced that because they heard it from someone else, right?
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So I think people are becoming much more accepting of offshore resources, and they're also realizing that some of the myths just aren't true. So I think that's a big evolution. And I remember when I was working with Ukraine, and Ukraine had that whole uproar of, you know, Russia stealing part of the country. I was working at NBC Sports at the time, and they're like, "What's going to happen here? This is why we didn't want to go with offshore, because look at this political challenge. This could really ruin the project." There wasn't even a blip. So for us, we had resources that were in Crimea. We had to stop working with them, but we were able to roll the resources in, and the core team wasn't there. So, I think even the worst of cases, we've seen that it hasn't been the disaster that people thought it would be.
So the other benefit that I've started seeing also is give the agencies or the clients a competitive edge over others. Now, I'm sure you have also seen, since you have been working with offshore for some time, and as your competitors who may or may not be working with offshore, but you enjoy a bigger profit margin than them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, having said that, do you see as an industry, do you think agencies will start lowering their prices going forward as more and more people have gone global? Do you think
Boone
that
coming in with the hard question?
because nobody talks about prices, everybody talks about
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
what do you think, like where the industry is headed, that perspective?
So I think prices have to level off some at least, right? So I try and keep my margins still reasonable, right? So they definitely, I don't want to be in a situation where I'm charging US resource prices for offshore resources, right? It just doesn't make sense, because that level of margin, it doesn't open up some doors that would potentially open for you. If you can come in and say, hey, I'm differentiated because you're going to be able to get super high quality work done, and you're going to be able to get more of it done because I can come in with a differentiated model. I think that's for me, that's where it needs to be. I think big agencies are going to continue to push for the highest possible margin they can get, and they may still get it, right? So they come to the table with large enterprises that they offer insurance, right? So nobody was fired for hiring IBM. There's something to that, right? So if a large agency like Digitas comes in and says, hey, here are the rates. I remember when I worked for Digitas years and years ago, very early in my career, they were charging, I think, $350 an hour from me. And I was 25 years old, right? And I think that there's tolerance there, and that certainly it takes a lot of tolerance to see a 25-year-old walk into your boardroom and know that you're paying them $350 an hour. But there's insurance that comes with that, and of course I was spectacular, so it didn't matter. But I think when we look at offshore, companies are going to have to come to a place where customers are going to push from an angle that, hey, your prices or your overhead is lower. Why am I still paying rates like this? And I just avoid that altogether because I'm not setting prices at an unreasonable level.
Yeah, I wondered because until before COVID, I think many agencies have been working offshore with or without letting their clients know. So clients would expect the US rates without even knowing that what agency is paying. But now everybody knows that you are not getting stuff done here. So if you are not giving me a lower rate, I may go find some other North American agency because somebody will.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So I foresee there has to be a shift in the in the pricing. Moreover, as I don't know if you've heard, many MNCs, multinational companies overseas have started buying companies here, like digital agencies here, right?
Yep.
Now, agencies who were, pricing at certain level, now if they're working under, bigger companies like TCS, Wipro, they are going to, have to change their prices again because they go for volume. They don't care about, value pricing. They just want more and more work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what I feel, but you never know. So
I agree. I mean, it's hard to say. And I think it's going to depend. The agencies are going to take a lot longer. Large agencies are going to take a lot longer, but they may get the pressure that forces them to. But I think we're on a path to more reasonable offshore rates.
Yeah.
It's easier to find resources too, regardless if you're a large or small agency, even with everybody home, with the rise of, and the prevalence of, dare I say it, Fiverr, Upwork, all of these kind of opportunities. And, it's a little bit outside of the scope of what we're talking about, but from a
Yeah.
pricing perspective, even clients that I've worked with are like, well, just go on Fiverr and get it done. I'm like, do you want to pay $20 or do you want me to go find somebody who's like worth $100 you're going to pay? It's an interesting quality time conversation to be had there.
Yeah, and I definitely see that in like some of the other capabilities that so we offer copywriting, we offer creative, it's in those areas, you get what you pay for, right? So I've rarely found a designer who was inexpensive, who did high or very inexpensive, did high quality work, right? And I think from a copywriting perspective, it's the same thing. And even some of the like business analysts, project managers that are out there, there's some that'll work for, for $40 an hour. There's some that'll work for $150 an hour. And generally you see a significant difference. So it depends on the project, but I do feel like there's very much, you get what you pay for in certain circumstances, especially when you're using a resource like that with onshore resources.
Certainly. I wanted to go back. I had made a note. You guys were talking about communication positives, and the shift we've had culturally, in our acceptance of working in a more global capacity, and interesting. And I don't know if you've seen this, the culture always comes up a big, how do we make people feel like they're part of the organization? How do we run things so that we're all on the same page? You're talking about core teams and things along those lines. It's an interesting, I feel like Slack solves a really big, like instant messenger was 20 years ago.
Exactly.
I feel like Slack solves a lot of those challenges and a lot of those hurdles. Like we've eliminated the water. I'm in Boston, so we'll say the water bubbler. I mean, all three of us actually are in the Boston area, the water bubbler, or fountain or whatever you want to call it in your location. But those conversations that happen when you're walking by a kitchen and you're like, oh, hey, so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. I feel like that's the big thing that we're missing. And I think it's a huge opportunity for, adjacent staff, outsourced staff, people who aren't considered core team to be able to participate in the conversations because of tech like Slack. Do you find that to be, an asset to the way that you guys have worked with your outsourced folks?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I look at one of my largest challenges as a manager and particularly managing teams, international teams, it's how do you find that commonality, right? How do you find, we at Blink Reaction, we tried to really create one culture. Well, we realized you can't do that, right? So it's trying to create one culture is not possible. Ukraine and US are very different places with very different views, but you can find some commonality, right? That's what was key to us. So first we're like, oh, we'll make one culture, or this is the company culture. Well, that doesn't make any sense at all. It wasn't going to work. And then we realized, well, there are some commonalities though. We're all driving towards excellence in the work that we're doing. We're all really dedicated to the work. We all have things we enjoy outside of work, right? So and that's where for us, pre-Slack at that point, we were using Skype, and Skype was an integral tool for us. Mm-hmm. And when I interviewed folks, I'd interview project managers, US-based project managers with distinct concerns about how do you integrate with your offshore team. Skype was the answer, right? So that's one of the big things. And that's how I got to know a lot of the people on my team that were based in Ukraine, was just having face-to-face conversations, virtual face-to-face conversations, and really understanding them, right? So it wasn't necessarily about creating one common culture, but it was understanding the people, right? So I knew that Andre really loved biking, and he was biking on a daily basis, and we just found ways to really make ourselves human and not just resources that we're working together on a common goal. So that was a really important part, and Skype was integral to it. And now Slack is far better than what Skype was. It is huge.
It takes some time. I mean, ask me, like I've been doing this for 20 years, right? Mm-hmm. And I've been here in United States for more than 16 years now. So I've seen both the worlds. And I think the only way that I've experienced and learned to solve the culture gap is doing little things like, so for me, Slack did not work. The reason it did not work is because what you are writing what you are typing, what you're sending is not what they are understanding or hearing.
Yeah.
They understand the language, they understand the meaning of that language, but what goes behind it, what is the intricate meaning about that they will not understand unless and until they know about the culture. So I started doing little tweaks to the way I interacted with them, just like do a video call, right?
Yep.
Seeing them in like doing their background, their what type of room settings they are, what type of office settings they are, what is going on in their world, and just talk about other than just work. And that requires a lot of patience and empathy, and you need to get into their world, like as I think Bill also mentioned, right? You need to spend more time with them talking about stuff
Mm.
that that
The
that
water bubbler conversations.
water
Yeah.
cooler, whatever, yeah.
Yeah.
So that doesn't happen, and that because we are so busy, we want everything done right now. Like
Yeah.
we just talk to the point and just get over it. That doesn't solve the problem.
I think it goes both ways too. We've talked a lot about Vistaprint, but for obvious reasons. When I was there, we were helping to set up their call center. Their call center was based in Jamaica. Part of that was flying down to Jamaica, sitting at a desk,
Yeah.
going out to dinner. The best thing was like, okay, guys, where are we going? I saw parts of Jamaica and going to different clubs and things like that. I'll spare the stories for this particular podcast, but it allowed you to like get to know somebody. The video chat wasn't a thing back then. I will not age myself in that. But the idea of like when you get home, it's like, well, tell me about your blah blah blah. Oh, I made the recipe that you gave me, or how's your mom doing? It's like it's the connection, which actually leads me to my next question for both of you. Actually, having an offshore team, does it give you a competitive advantage from a global approach to the problem solving? Bill, we started off our conversation around solutions.
Yeah.
And so the idea of having, and you had talked about partners and bringing in people with various expertise, but having the global approach is what I'll say. Since we're talking about Ukraine, we've talked to people who have Latin American folks, Varun's experiences in India. I was talking about Jamaica. It's a full, there's a full gamut of countries that we've referenced, even people within the United States too. Do you feel like that adds, this is a loaded question, do you feel like it adds value to having those global approaches to solutions and problem solving there, that makes the work better, the end product better? I'm hoping you're both going to say yes, but
yeah. Well, yeah, and I'm seeing it on a daily basis, right? So I've seen it myself for many years, right? Because I can find the best experts wherever. So when we had a Ukrainian team, it wasn't like we had one office in Ukraine, and now with the teams that I work with too, it's not one office, that they are distributed. So you're getting the best people from wherever they may be. And I was talking to a person I worked with years ago at Endeca, and he was saying to me that this is the first time that he's actually started to use remote resources. And he's like, it's amazing. I'm finding the best people, and the pool of people I can actually choose from is so much broader. And he's like, I've been looking at Boston people my whole life or my whole career. And he said, there's such competition here. The cost is so high. He said, I have people now that are based in the Midwest that are happy to work at a lower rate. It's still it's an excellent salary for them, and they have the expertise that I need, and it works really well. So I'm seeing them experiencing something I experienced many years ago, and even just from a domestic perspective.
You bring up an interesting point, and I'm hesitant to ask a question, but I'm going to do it anyways. The idea of the talent pool opening up. We've talked a lot about pricing, and let's talk about the price of people in some cases. That sounds really creepy, and I don't mean it that way. But, being in the Boston area or even coastal, California versus here, the cost of living is high. The cost of salaries are high that goes with it. The idea of opening up remotely across the planet allows us to be flexible and hire the right person for the right thing. What do you guys think how that will affect, costs of people, salaries here? It's going to get so much more, I'm assuming it's going to get so much more competitive in a different way, like the inflation related to salaries has to adjust, does it not? You know, that's not really a question. I guess it's a statement, but I guess I'm looking for thoughts for both of you on that. Am I crazy to say that? Is that, what do you think? No, I'm taking a little bit of a left turn in our conversation, but I'm getting
Varun,
meta.
I realize I keep jumping in, Varun. I don't know if you want to
Go ahead. You can answer better from that perspective. We don't have many people here. You have folks here, so you would know what your people are planning to do. What I'm hearing from my friends and families who do work here, that people have started to move out from, city lives.
Yeah.
Well,
That
that's
is one
huge.
trend. Everybody's hearing that. I mean, so that is definitely, we are seeing that trend. Like, people do want to, but at the same time, they expect the higher salary and want to work at a lower cost places. I don't know how long will that sustain. Like, we are already seeing the backlash at California and Facebook and Google's when they started doing that. But in the longer run, I definitely see there will be again a shift in
It's
how.
gotta level out at some point, man.
Yeah.
And you see some specialties, right? Like, people are becoming more and more specialized. And I think that's where you're going to start to see or be able to maintain the premium, is being very deep in something very specific. Whereas I think being more of a generalist it's going to be challenging to maintain those same types of salaries in some of the more expensive places.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I think all three of us live, in pretty suburban areas. And one of the things that we like to do in this particular area is watch what houses go on sale.
Yeah.
So you're watching Realtor, Zillow, whatever those sites are. And it's been really interesting migration the past year. I know this is common across the country. People are moving out of the city, they're moving into the burbs. But usually this time of year, like the area that we live in, there's 1 trillion homes for sale. Like, we would spend weekends just going to open houses, and stuff like that. There's nothing on the market right now. It's so crazy to like illustrate your point, Varun. Like, there's nothing. There's maybe a couple, and they'll go like that. It's an interesting dilemma. All right, I'm gonna bring us back. I'm gonna bring us back from left field. Let's talk a little bit more about agencies and running an agency. Bill, you with some of your experience and how did you get into this? What led you to this point? Working for some cool companies and some interesting, like what brought you to open up your own shop?
Yeah, so I'll start at the very beginning, but then I'll jump forward quickly because it's a funny story at the very beginning. So when I was in college, I was working for housing services, fixing computers, so running around, driving a van and going to different housing areas and fixing there. I think at the time they were 486s. I think we're moving into Pentiums. That's how old I am. But our boss came into the common room that we sat in at one day, and she said, "Hey, there's this new thing out there, the World Wide Web. Somebody want to look into it for us and see how we might be able to use it?" I was like, "I'll check it out." So yeah, that really was a career defining hand race. And from there, I had the title of webmaster at one point. So it was an excellent title up at Jackson Lab in Bar Harbor, Maine, which is an amazing place to live.
You got to say it right though, Bahama.
Exactly. Bahama, yeah. Down east. But yeah, from there, I ended up coming back to Massachusetts. I grew up in Massachusetts, but came back to Massachusetts because of the opportunity that was there. It was the dot-com boom. I was offered twice my salary that I was making in Maine to come back here and work for the MathWorks, which was a great experience, a really cool team. And I think that's very much the same company it used to be. And then I get into Digitas offered me another, 50% more than I was making. So I moved over there and they told me I was going to be a project manager half the time and the developer half the time, which is what I wanted to do. And I was never a developer again. So I was a project manager and I have evolved through project management, but basically in working with Digitas, we were doing technology implementation, and that was my start. And then from there, I moved into professional services and ended up working, to where I am today in professional services and customer success. Of course, back then, professional services was customer success, and now we have true customer success capability with SaaS being out there.
Mm-hmm.
But I was at a lot of companies that people would recognize, and those companies grew quickly and they were successful, and I was a part of that, right? And it was really exciting for me. And even moving from Acquia, over to Blink Reaction, we ended up building Blink Reaction from 35 people to 150 people, and we sold it and became a company of 450 specialized in Drupal. And that was a lot of fun, right? It was a lot of fun to take that ride. But once I got to the point of that, having integrated all those teams, I stepped back and said, what do I want to do here? I've enjoyed my career. I've enjoyed the things I've done on a day-to-day basis.
What is the purpose of my life?
Right, exactly. And that was the step I took back. And what I realized was that I think I can do this on my own, right? I've supported so many companies in doing this. I have a lot of experience. I have lots of connections. I think I can do this. And I really wanted to, right? So I'd worked for people throughout my career. I'd had some pretty senior leadership roles, but I was always working for someone else, and that other person was making decisions that sometimes I wished I could make. And I suspected that the outcomes would be different if I made those decisions. So that's when I decided to go with Advanced Velocity and just make it happen. I stumbled at the beginning, like so many others do. My first customer was, they ended up hiring me. And like so many others, once you finish what was intended to be the first project, you sit back and say, what's next? And they weren't ready to move on some of the things that would have been next. So I was happy to go back to Advanced Velocity and go from there. So that's kind of the path that really, I was looking for that next challenge, right? So I built services organizations, I built customer success organizations, I'd refined them, and it was time for me to try and build something from scratch and really apply the experience that I had.
What would you say is your biggest challenge that you've had so far leading Advanced Velocity? Or Velocity, not philosophy, velocity. We got meta earlier. That's where the philosophy is coming from.
So if I think about my challenges, we talked about one of my challenges, which is the focus of the company, right? Yeah. So what is the focus and who are we? What's the personality? But if I talk about another one that many people that come at a company from the angle that I came at it from, the challenge that they have is really business development, right? Marketing and business development. There were other teams that did that, right? I didn't deal with that. And even from the solutions that we were building, I wasn't dealing with any of the marketing of it. So those things are hard, right? They're hard. There's people that do it that are really specialized. It's Jesse, you, for example, it's that is your background. You've done it for many years, right? So for me to try and step in and think that I can do that it's you need help, right? You need help with those things. So I think that's much harder than I anticipated. And I have a big network. I've been lucky to have a lot of organic business come my way. But when I realized it was time to start to step it up, I realized that I had some challenges ahead of me. So scaling is difficult, and it takes branding, it takes marketing, and really having good business development.
I mean, that speaks to my heart.
Did I say it the right way? We prepped for this, but did I say it the right way?
No, you're good. You're good. Shh, don't say that. No, but in all seriousness, it's an interesting, people get into the world of running a company. They're doing it because they're good at the thing that they're doing. They're not good at promoting the thing that they're doing. So, it tends to be a common challenge that we've heard. But
how big do you want to become? How
good question.
far do you want to go?
That's a good question. I really, in building my business, I want to make sure that I maintain the level of service, the highest level of service for customers. And I also want it to be reasonable, right? So I've been at so many startups and I've run at 150 miles per hour for many, many years, right? And it's hard to run my own business, and I still run at that speed. But I do want to get to a point where it's more manageable, right? I'm not looking to build a huge organization. I would love to have a smaller to medium-sized organization that is manageable and allows the team to do what they want to do on a day-to-day basis, allows some flexibility and some opportunity to have a life outside too. So it's really indeterminate, but I know that it's important to me to enjoy what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, especially if it's mine, right? Like it's crazy for me to be doing something I don't like when I'm the one that's actually leading it.
Certainly. Well, this was a great chat. Thanks so much. Any parting last words before I wrap things up here, Bill?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk. It's been great to see you. Great to meet you, Varun. So yeah, I definitely have enjoyed this.
This was good. Well, thanks so much for being here. So I have the list of places where people can find you if they want to connect with you. Where you're on the LinkedIn, you're on the Twitter. We have your company website, which is advancedvelocity.com, which will be linked in all the places where this gets posted. And then you have your special project, which we didn't talk at all about, but I'll tease it here for you, is superstudyhall.com. So do you want to give a little blurb on what that is, and then we'll wrap things up?
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for the opportunity on that. So yeah, superstudyhall.com is the company's Super Study. We had actually started this just before the pandemic. It looks like it's aligned with the pandemic, but it was just before. But what we're focused on is a different approach to tutoring. So segmented tutoring, we call it study halls. So you can actually, on 4 nights a week, be able to go in and, or your child can go in and actually get the support they need. And we only charge for the increment that they use of time. So it could be as small as a 10-minute need. They may only need it Monday and Thursday, but it's available Monday through Thursday. So kind of a different approach, and really trying to support kids as best we can.
Yeah, where were you guys when I was in high school? Was the big question. But anyways, well, thanks so much. That's it, everyone. If you learned something today, if you laughed, or tell someone about the podcast. Thanks so much, Varun. You have a great day. Till next time. Thanks for listening. Find our other episodes on agenciesthatbuild.com. Plus, we're listed anywhere you find your favorite podcast.